good afternoon to all of you who are US based, and a good and early morning to those who are joining us from down under. We are thrilled to have you with us today. Um, we are going to be discussing how cities and states can accelerate e-bike adoption using RMI's free e-bike calculator. I'm Ellen Kennedy. I'm a principal for carbon-free transportation at RMI. Next slide, please. I wanted to give you a bit of a sense of why we're here today. As you may or may not know about RMI, our mission aligns with transforming global energy systems to secure a clean, prosperous, zero carbon future for all. Now, how does this relate to e-bikes? We'll get to that in a moment. We're going to be sharing with you how we've updated our environmental and economics impact assessment calculator, which is a free tool for you all to use in talking about how to structure your own e-bike programs and thinking about how incentives might be built to help promote mode shift. And in thinking about what sort of data you can gain from this tool for free. We're also going to be making space for you to ask questions at the end of presentation and at the end of a panel discussion, and hope that you will find quite a bit to take away from our time together today. I'm going to be joined in a moment with, by my colleagues Bryn and Carol. Next slide. And we're just going to take you through an overview of what has been updated in the calculator. We're going to have a panel with some city and state officials and an informal Q&A where you can ask them questions, where you can ask us questions, and then we can do a step-by-step walkthrough of the calculator with you for those who are unfamiliar with the tool. Next slide, please. So just so you know what to expect from this process, our plan for question and answers will have time with the panel. You can submit your questions online, and then we'll either respond to you directly, or if there's anything that you'd rather direct to us over email, you can email Bryn, whose contact information is on the slide. Next slide, please. So, big question. Why did we create this impact assessment calculator? Next slide. Surprising probably to none of you, the potential for impact with this sort of data is huge. Transportation is consistently the largest emissions producing sector in the United States. And of the trips that happen within that sector, most are from light duty vehicles and most are short trips. So when you think about how mode shift can really have an effect on greenhouse gas emissions, on vehicle miles traveled, on public health outcomes, there is a lot that can happen in this space if we start promoting bikes and e-bike use. What we have seen is that even in just using this calculator's defaults for the 10 states with the highest transportation emissions, over the course of 10 years, we could save 3.3 billion gallons of gasoline if we shifted these trips to non-polluting modes. And it would save residents in these states over $11.5 billion, and that's just in fuel and maintenance alone. So it's really something to consider in terms of the impact to environment, in terms of the impact to economy, and in helping to reduce the transportation cost burdens that people experience on a daily basis. Next slide, please. Adding to the last slide, when we think about the potential of e-bikes to meet transportation emission reduction and equity goals, they are more affordable, certainly, than owning your own cars. They require less space, and they result in more positive health incomes, both for the people riding them and for the people that are no longer having to breathe in emissions that are auto-generated. So what we have seen is that there is a huge amount of potential to address equity through this mode. We have also seen that decision makers often need more data in order to make their case for how to think about infrastructure investment and how to promote more active transportation. Next slide, please. In terms of addressing the gaps in transportation offerings, we have seen that e-bikes can act as connectors. They can provide direct transportation access and cut trip-related pollution, but they can also create access to other modes such as transit. We know that cities are starting to look at how to better allocate space. And so when it comes to traffic congestion and land use and parking minimums, e-bikes are actually a great solution that help change the formula of what is needed in space allocation, and also in terms of how to bridge the gaps in offerings that exist throughout cities. Next slide, please. So we wanted to give you a sense of what these updates look like, and I'll turn it over to Carol to take you through that.
Hello, everyone. I'm Carol, and I'll be talking about some of the updates that we've made in terms of functionality and in terms of inputs. Next slide, please. So to summarize, the updated features are a broader range of geographic locations, new functionality, and new output metrics. So on that first point, we've expanded the list of cities and towns, as well as adding all 50 states in the United States. We've updated metrics on costs that go into the calculator, and we've pulled in some additional vehicle trip data to give you results on an annual basis rather than just a weekly basis. The improved functionality includes a more granular way to specify incentive programs, seasonality, and state-level EV projections rather than just national ones. And the new capabilities include metrics on energy and gasoline use reductions and estimates of health benefits stemming from the use of e-bikes instead of cars. Next slide, please. So making these improvements required updating or pulling in some entirely new data sets. Expanding the set of towns and cities required building better infrastructure for querying for trip data. This is sort of a very necessary input for the calculator because we need to know how much are people driving different distances in each of your cities and towns. Our solution for this is based on a company called Replica. And this is specifically a US-based solution. Support for seasonality, or to put another way, like just the fact that people are more likely to bike when it's nice out, requires us to know the weather in each location that we provide in the calculator. So that's, hundreds of cities. Luckily, there is the Global Historical Climatological Network, which includes data from weather stations in or near all of the places in the calculator. And this is a global data set, so it's quite possible to do this, probably for whatever location you're interested in. Quantifying health benefits requires a model that considers regional airflow as well as health outcomes, right? Because even if you're reducing pollution right where you are, pollution moves, with airflows. And so our solution for this was to use EPA's COBRA tool, which models the transport of pollution by airflow between counties, and is backed up by studies of the effects of pollution reduction on health outcomes. This is also a US specific solution. Next slide, please. So the updated calculator, as I said, provides a more refined way to assess the effects of incentive programs. So backing up, right, we have two kinds of scenarios. We have a general mode shift goal and an incentive impact scenario. In the mode shift goal scenario, you, the user, you put in sort of the percentage of car trips that become bike trips, right? Like how that happens, is unspecified, but this gives you, right, this gives you a way of quantifying if you meet a certain goal, what will happen. In the incentive impact scenario, you specify incentive amounts, so cash, how much cash can people get to buy e-bikes for participants with different income levels. This used to be just market rate, sort of higher income, and income qualified. And so we've refined this into more categories in order to provide to give you a more granular way of designing an e-bike incentive program to assess the outcomes of that. Next, please. And as a reminder, right, sorry, could you go back a sec? Thanks. As a reminder, right, all of this is measuring potential, right? Exactly what's going to happen, right? We do not guarantee that exactly what we predict will happen, but we think this is a very useful tool for providing estimates of what a goal or incentive program can achieve in your city. And I think it's over to the panel now.
Yes, thank you so much. All right, well, now we are going to move into a panel with city representatives. These are cities and state officials who have actually overseen the implementation and designing of an e-bike incentive program. Next slide, please. So we are very lucky to be joined by representatives from one state and two cities. So I am going to begin by passing this over to Mike Salisbury from the Colorado Energy Office to introduce himself and talk a bit about his work in e-bikes. Mike, please go ahead.
Hey, good morning or afternoon, I guess, everyone. Thank you very much. I'm really excited to be here to talk about e-bikes, the state of Colorado's experience with e-bikes. As mentioned, I work at the Colorado Energy Office. I'm the director of transportation programs there, and so oversee work on electric vehicle charging stations, but also focusing a lot on electrified mobility. And e-bikes are a big part of that. Yeah, if we can go to whatever my next slide is, it's probably intro slide, next slide is just really kind of look at the Colorado Energy Office. Really we're out there trying to reduce greenhouse gas emissions equitably for all Coloradans. And we talk about zero emission vehicles. We definitely count e-bikes as kind of the most, one of the most zero emission vehicles, one of the, most efficient ways to get around. So we see huge climate benefits coming from e-bikes. Next slide, please. So I do like to tout, brag, whatever the word is, that Colorado is kind of the #1 e-bike state. We can get into competitions with our friendly other states, but we have done a lot of great work in this space. A lot of really cool programs have come out of Colorado and also cities in Colorado. I previously also worked at the city of Denver, which had a very exciting and popular e-bike incentive while I was there. So a lot of time and effort has been gone into the state with doing e-bike incentive programs. I've been there for a lot of that. Colorado, I think, has taken some really important steps. I'll talk a little, just give some very brief highlights on some of the programs we have in place in the state of Colorado right now. But we are, have programs to incentivize e-bikes, over tens of millions of dollars in incentives to get people to adopt e-bikes. We're seeing some great success already in this space, and hoping we can share some of that success and some of the lessons learned with other cities and states across the country or even the world. Next slide, please. So a couple different programs we have offered in the state of Colorado. I'm going to really highlight the statewide e-bike rebate program and then the e-bike tax credit. The other two programs are smaller programs. I can go into more detail about those if people are interested, but those are the two top ones are really our big incentive programs that we've launched, and that, I would then tie back to, the able to use the RMI calculator has been helpful in both those situations as well back at the city of Denver. Next slide, please. So a big program, this is the e-bike rebate program. This was based on legislation passed in 2022. It set aside $12 million for e-bike programs. About 10 million of that went into this rebate program. It was focused on income qualified residents or low or moderate income residents of the state could get up to $1,100 off the purchase of an e-bike. It's an upfront incentive they receive. They apply ahead of time. Then they receive that voucher if they get approved, and then they can take that to one of the many participating bike shops in the state of Colorado. So this, launched back in 2023. It's just kind of wrapping up right now. We're kind of going through the last of our budget to finish up this program. But I think we've seen some really great success, like many e-bike programs that I've seen or seen across the country. It's been very oversubscribed. So we had about over 40,000 people apply to the program. We only were able to issue about 10,000 rebates. And of those, just under 8,000 of those rebates have been redeemed. So we have about 8,000 e-bikes on the road in Colorado today from this program. Most of these rebates going to low-income Coloradans, with the balance going to moderate-income Colorados. Again, is a point-of-sale rebate. There was $1,100 for low-income, $500 for moderate-income residents, and also an adder for e-cargo bikes and adaptive e-bikes as well. We also had an additional adder for people to also purchase a helmet and a lock as well. So again, that program is just finishing up, and now we're kind of a bit in the transitional phase. If you go to the next slide, where the state now offers a e-bike tax credit that is available to all Coloradans. It's a bill that was passed back in 2023. It is, you can see, it's $450 off the purchase of an e-bike. Again, it's a point of sale incentive. In this situation, it's a tax credit, but the tax credit is being essentially taken on by the bike shop that is selling the e-bike. The customer essentially is able to show up at the shop, fill out a form, and instantly receive that $450 off the purchase price of their e-bike without having to wait to file their taxes in the next year. So there's been some challenges in this space. The bike shops have had to wait to get reimbursed, which can definitely provide a challenge to bike shops, especially smaller bike shops that maybe aren't heavily capitalized. But we're seeing a lot of enthusiasm for this program. Just over the 9 months since it launched April, and just for the 2024 year, we think we saw about 15,000 e-bike purchases take place from this program. So a lot of enthusiasm. Colorado residents are really excited about this program, taking a lot of e-bikes, putting them on the road. So we're very excited about this program, and really looking forward to kind of continuing its rollout over the coming years and continuing to try to figure out how to make it work better for Colorado residents. I think my next slide, maybe my last slide. Yeah, so I just wanted to give that really brief high-level overview. I'm really excited to dive into the panel and get questions from participants. So thank you very much.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Mike. That was great. Please be aware, audience, you can send in questions at any point. We will have Q&A with all of our panelist members. Matthew, we'd love to hear you talk about your program with the City of Edina.
Yeah, thank you, Bryn, and thanks for that great introduction, Mike. We've been really inspired by a lot of the work being done out in Colorado, here in Minnesota. So the city of Edina, for those who don't know, it's a city of about 53,000 people that directly borders southwest Minneapolis, so an inner ring suburb. So relative to other suburbs in the Twin Cities, relatively dense. And we've had a climate action plan since 2021 that has a number of strategies and goals around, transportation emission reductions, particularly around vehicle miles traveled, or VMT reductions, because obviously being a suburb, it's a very car-centric community. So looking to reduce those miles traveled. And to help support the implementation of the Climate Action Plan in 2022, we launched the Community Climate Action Fund, which is a program that I help run, where we provide financial incentives similar to what Mike was just talking about to residents and businesses in Edina. Initially, it launched just for home energy improvements, insulation, heat pumps, induction stoves, things to kind of get natural gas out of people's homes and make them more weatherized as well, particularly for our very, very chilly winters. And so because of that program, we'd seen a lot of success in that. And then in 2023, kind of modeled off of Colorado's program, the state of Minnesota set aside $4 million for an e-bike rebate program. So $2 million in 2024, which happened this past summer, and another $2 million in 2025. And we knew after, in Colorado with how rapaciously folks went after the money that we'd probably have a big demand in Minnesota as well. So we were like, we already have this fund set aside. We're a relatively denser suburb. Like, how can we help support the state's new program that we know is probably going to run out of money in about 10 minutes? Which we know because the website crashed within about 30 seconds of it launching this past summer, unfortunately. So we decided to just have our existing rebate program just tack on e-bikes. We used a lot of work that the state had already done. So using their e-bike retailer list and things like that. And then we kind of also modeled off of Denver how to break up the different incentives. So we offer a $500 base for folks. And then if you qualify, we have various environmental justice criteria for all of our funding programs. You can get $1,000. And then similar to Denver, we also have adders for e-cargo bikes and adaptive e-bikes, which has been really exciting. So we launched that last year and had a lot of folks. We only had about $26,000 set aside, and we used it all up within about 3 months. So we've moved now because it was first come, first serve. So a lot of folks just didn't hear about it and missed out. So now we've moved to a quarterly lottery system where every 3 months we give out 10 of the rebates until we run out of the cash again, which hopefully we will do by the November lottery. So it's been a lot of fun, and we're seeing a lot of interest from Edina residents and having more transportation choices.
Fabulous. Thank you so much, Matthew. And last for this part of the panel before we move into some questions, but certainly not least, I'd like to welcome some gentlemen from Georgia, Teos and Ben. Please introduce yourselves and talk about what you guys have been doing.
Thanks, Bryn. Hi, everyone. I'm Tejas Kotak from the Atlanta Regional Commission. As a quick overview, the Atlanta Regional Commission is a multi-county organization. We wear a lot of different hats. One of the main ones we wear is as the Atlanta Region's Metropolitan Planning Organization. And so we work for not just the city of Atlanta, but 19 counties surrounding the city. Ben, if I may, can I just talk a bit about how we use the calculator, and then you can talk about our actual program? Yeah, so a lot of my work is centered around data analysis and metrics and using a lot of different tools that are either paid for by ARC or freely available. And when we saw the RMI calculator, we thought it would be a really valuable resource to discuss how an e-bike program could work if ARC or any of our constituent governments would run one. So the e-bike calculator was really valuable to us to do really quick iterations on if we had a certain amount of money, how could we spread e-bikes around the region? This helped bring in our senior leadership and our executive team into the conversation and say, for not a lot of money, we would have an outsized impact on the amount of greenhouse gases we could reduce and the amount of active mode users we could either help transition to a more accessible and higher quality bike ride, or people who currently do not have cars and need a high quality way to get around the region. This is a good way for us to do it. And to level set that a little bit more, in the Atlanta region's area, we have about 45% of our greenhouse gases coming from our transportation sector. And over the past 10 years, the overall carbon emissions from the Atlanta region have gone down, but transportation emissions have increased both as a percentage of the whole, but also in a raw amount. So this is something that we are really concerned about and really need to attack from a lot of different ways. And electrification is definitely something we are concerned about in our transportation realm, but when we say electrification, it needs to be not just cars, not just transit, but also how can electrification of these active modes really help people get around the region? Because a lot of our trips are that 3 to 5 mile range, and the first few miles can be fine with a traditional bike, but because our region is so hilly, because there are areas where you have to go through miles of arterials and just miles of parking lots, an e-bike can really help people get around. So we were able to show through a lot of iterative data that we could run in a matter of a few afternoons using the RMI's calculator that this would be a really high benefit cost analysis for us. And at some point, we were able to convince our senior leadership, and we got support from the city of Atlanta through a grant. And I'm going to let Ben talk about what the actual program looked like for us.
Sure. Thank you, Tejas. And thanks to everyone at RMI for the invite to talk about this program. It's really exciting that we're able to talk and speak about our experience here. Again, my name is Ben Camber. I'm a senior program analyst here at the Atlanta Regional Commission. I also serve as the project manager for the e-bike rebate program. I started here, I think in May of last year, May of 2024, just as we were launching the program. So Tejas and some of my colleagues were really instrumental in making the internal case and really building a lot of the support for this, but I've kind of seen the implementation of the program here. Just briefly about the program, again, as Tejas said, ARC is focused on 19 counties throughout the region. This is a program that ARC is administering on behalf of the city of Atlanta. So this is a city of Atlanta specific program, even though our organization has a much larger geographic area. And the program really was modeled, my understanding was modeled a lot on the city of Denver's program. We really looked at the city of Denver's program, city of Tampa's program, kind of looked at their experiences and their successes and really modeled our program around theirs. The city of Atlanta donated $1 million for this program last year. And one of the major requirements of this program was it is equity focused. 3/4 of those funds went towards income qualified rebates. So those are rebates that are targeting people who make 80% or less of the area median income here in the Atlanta region. And like a lot of these programs, there was just enormous demand and response when we launched applications last year. So we received between 2 application cycles, nearly 16,000 applications. And I think somebody, Atlanta is a city of about 500,000 people. So to do the math on that, it's like 3% of the city of Atlanta's population applied for this program. So just enormous amount of interest and demand and excitement around it. Unfortunately, it's obviously a budget constrained program. We ended up being able to issue 734 rebates. Of those rebates, about 580 ended up being redeemed. So our redemption rate was about 78-79%. And we've just received enormous positive feedback. We're now in the midst of doing program evaluation and kind of measuring what the impact has been on the program so far. So really exciting news on that front as well. So I think I'll turn it back to the moderator here and get into the questions.
Fantastic. Thank you so much. So we're going to ask the panelists a couple of questions that we pre-wrote, and then we will be opening it up to the audience, and we will be addressing the fantastic questions that you've been sending in on the Q&A. If you have questions, please send them in. If we can't get to it, we will email you and see if we can answer your questions that way. So to all of the panelists, what I would like to begin with is a question about what types of data do you think can be convincing to people who might be hesitant about starting up an e-bike program in their city or their state, or expanding e-bike use overall? And what utility did you find in the calculator or in just other things overall to address those concerns and questions?
can start. Thanks. Great question, Bryn. I think, to speak to the calculator first, I will say it's super helpful, like just the data embedded in it already, like the data on local trips that was being shared at the beginning, like breaking it down in your city, in your state, X% of trips are less than 5 miles, X% of trips are 10 miles. Like that is foundationally critical data that I didn't know was not easy to find across the US before this calculator was launched. So like that to me is convincing because we're trying to talk about, gosh, 60% of the trips in Denver or in Colorado are less than 10 miles. So like that's a huge potential. You talk about the potential for e-bikes. That really shows I think people tend to maybe overestimate how far they drive a lot of the time on a daily basis or per trip. And so this really has data that supports that these trips are replaceable by a mode like an e-bike. So that's really helpful. And I think also, when we're looking at data points, again, the calculator is really helpful because there's so many different things. They have greenhouse gas emissions, air quality data, vehicle miles traveled data, mobility cost savings, dollars per ton. And all of these are critical because what I see is like everyone has slightly different criteria. What are they trying to accomplish with their program? My programs are often very climate focused and not as much air quality or mobility focused. If you're trying to solve a VMT problem and that's your ultimate goal, as opposed to say a climate problem, that's going to impact the design of your program. And so the calculator really allows you to play with that and be like, well, if I'm trying to maximize VMT reduction, what do I tweak to do that? So like all those different data points are really critical, but it also really depends on what problem or problems often are you trying to address with your program. And it's hard to know those impacts ahead of time unless you have something like this to give you an idea to then take this pre-program launch or program design phase to your decision makers to say, we think if we invest X million dollars, we can have this VMT impact or this air quality impact or this kind of mobility improvement impact for our residents. So I'll pause there and let other people chime in.
Yeah, I'd like to just re-emphasize a lot of things Mike said and like emphasize that it also helped a lot for our studies that a lot of these data were already integrated into the calculator. ARC has also been lucky that we also have access to the replica data set. That's something that we, through a East Coast consortium, we already pay for that data. So we wanted to do some updates to our data to bring it to the most current year or do some experiments to see, let's look at some pre-pandemic VMT data and some current and technically post-pandemic VMT data. So we were able to pull that in. And Bryn and her team were really helpful in allowing us to open up the calculator more and make our own custom edits, which having worked with other Excel-based calculators, this one is set up in a very straightforward manner that we were able to add in and customize to our own needs. And that really helped a lot. The ability for the outputs to be very clear and explainable to non-experts has also helped. So looking at the amount of potential VMT reduction if we continue this program for a number of years, the potential emissions reduction over a number of years, and also what are the co-health benefits from things like particulate matter reduction, NOx reduction. Those are also really valuable to us to show that this is not just about mobility and reducing carbon. There are also this myriad of co-health benefits to it. And that has helped us a lot in the overall arguments for why we should do this and why we should try to continue doing it. And one last thing I'll just add. It's really useful that the calculator has the ability to say, we have this much money and what are the number of e-bikes we can get from that? Or if we go from the other end, if we want to get, 1,000 e-bikes out there at a certain cost level, how much money do we need? So depending on the audience we're talking to and the argument we are making, we can do that analysis from either end. And that's just really valuable based on where we are coming from as an agency, and if we're talking to somebody who is cash flush and wants to give us something, or more likely we're given a certain amount of money and we have to figure out what our milestones and goals need to be.
Yeah, I would echo everything that Mike and Tejas have said. I cannot rave enough about the e-bike calculator. And we used it because, yeah, last year we were like, we're not seeing a ton of uptake in the climate action fund yet. We want to see more, like, let's do some pivots. And so, yeah, using that calculator, particularly, like I said, because like the VMT reduction model outputs that it gave us, were the most helpful, because I could then directly tie that back to a climate action plan strategy that we had and be like, okay, this is a strategy that council supports, and this is a way to directly support that. And it would be, I think it was like 408 and some thousand, miles reduced over 10 years, was really, folks, Bryn and I were talking last week, and she was like, yeah, like, what barriers did you have to overcome? And like, what doubts did folks have? And like, the calculator really, like, bringing the calculator first and be like, here are the outputs and what we could see, even, as they were saying in Atlanta, how a small amount of money can have a lot of impact. Like, that just immediately eliminated, like, I didn't have any pushback when I brought the potential program forward from folks, because I had that data ready to go. And it was super helpful. And I'm so excited to play around with the new version of it, now that our program is growing, to also look at those air quality things, particularly after like all the wildfire smoke that's come to the Twin Cities over the last couple of summers. So being able to look at all of those things, and the showing that and having the data be 10 years out and not just like what will happen in the first 6 months, shows the long-term impact of these programs in a way that folks aren't really impacted. Oh, this isn't just some flashy thing. This is something that will continue to accrue benefits for our community, for a decade plus.
Fabulous. Thank you guys so much for answering that question. We actually have so many great questions from the chat, and you answered the other question I was going to ask you, that I think we will directly move into some of the audience questions. So to begin, this is directed to all of the panelists. What mechanisms or approaches work best for securing consistent funding? What data do you need to collect to make the case for keeping funding flowing? So, and then they added a little bit of an extra niche, a spicy extra question. At what threshold do you need to contract out the rebates to deliver rebates to applicants and reimburse the bike shops? So please take a second to think about that, and feel free to then unmute yourselves and answer this question.
Yeah, so I answered kind of where the funding comes from a little bit in the Q&A chat already, but yeah, at least in Edina, and I know these things are called different things in every single state, but so we are funded via franchise fees, so it's just a couple bucks tacked onto every gas and electric bill for residents and commercial customers in Edina, and that then just goes straight to, we have two one pedestrian infrastructure fund, and then our conservation and sustainability fund, which is then where this money comes out of. And that's been a great mechanism for us because it's not general funds. So we don't have to go to our council every single year and justify the budget and ask for the money. And so it gives us a lot of flexibility. So we're very lucky in that regard, that we're able to use such a flexible and consistent funding source, because we know it's a flat fee. We know the number of customers, and that's not going to drastically change year to year. So we know like many years out what the budget will look like year to year. And then as for the reimbursement question, so at least for us, because there are no bike shops in Edina itself, they're all in neighboring municipalities. So we just directly reimburse the residents who receive it. And I wish it was point of sale. We just don't have the administrative capacity for that, unfortunately, as much as I wish, because that would be way more equitable than asking folks to upfront the money. But yeah, we just we just cut a check to residents after they have purchased the bike. So they just send us some paperwork and like receipts and things, and then we send the check out.
Yeah, I guess I'll come in here. So that first question is a great one. It's one we're actually trying to actively figure out right now because we've essentially, the city of Atlanta through general fund money donated $1 million to launch this program last year. And essentially we were, I guess so successful, there was so much demand for the program that we were able to spend 97% of that money in 2 application cycles last year. That's money that's already out the door, spent, reimbursed to bike shops, which is great. But now we're trying to figure out, what are kind of some of the data points that are going to really be compelling for the city for us to show to them. Obviously, we can show to them that there's enormous demand. We have all these awesome testimonials, but what are some of the hard data? So I think right now, one of the big pieces, our program is as dictated by the City of Atlanta equity focus. So we really wanted to take a look at what are some of the differences between folks who applied or redeemed their rebates, who were income qualified versus the general applicants. Do those groups differ in any way in terms of their usage of e-bikes, in terms of their redemption rates on those rebates? And some of the preliminary data that we're seeing from our evaluation efforts are showing that there is some differences. One of them I'll just say is that we've done, I think, about 3 surveys on everyone at this point. All of the people who applied, we did a survey, and income qualified applicants, 33% of them told us that they don't own or lease a car. That's compared to, I think, about 7% of the general applicants. So right there, you see a real big difference between just transportation access, between these 2 groups. And then we're seeing it actually within usage too. So of the income qualified rebate recipients, 62% of them, 62% of them are commuting to work or school at 62% greater rate than the general applicants who redeem their rebates. So they're using their e-bikes more. They're also redeem their rebates at a much higher rate. 93% of the income qualified rebate recipients redeem the rebates that were issued to them. That's compared to 63% of the general rebate recipients. So we're already getting some data that shows that it really is having an outsized impact between the income qualified group, which is really important to us. One of the recommendations for the program, if it's renewed this year, is to really double down on those income qualified applicants and kind of expand the rebates into different income groups, and just really focus on those groups because the data is showing us that they're really having a bigger impact from this program on a bunch of different outputs than the general applicants. But yeah, to that point, we're trying to figure that out right now. We'll see what's ultimately what's the most compelling case that we can make for why this program is something the City of Atlanta should renew, but also we're going to lots of other municipalities throughout the Atlanta region and trying to make the pitch for why they should do a program, why they should locally fund a program similar to what the City of Atlanta has done too. I think the second part of the question, the way, I don't know if this answers it, but the way that we did our program here is that they were point of sale rebates. So once somebody was issued a rebate, they visited a bike shop that was contracted with ARC. We had 12 brick and mortar bike shops located throughout the city. They took their rebate code that we issued to them. They went to the shop and they got an automatic discount of anywhere between $500 to $2,000 off the sale of the rebate of the bike. And then what ARC did, because we had contractual relationships with the bike shops, all these bike shops every 2 weeks would just invoice us for the rebates that they had redeemed, and then we would issue those reimbursements within 17 business days. So it seemed to work pretty well. I don't know if that answered the question, but it's kind of how our program worked.
Great. Mike, do you want to offer any thoughts?
I think to very much agree with what was shared. I think, one thing, we see is trying to justify the program. Again, it kind of goes back to who is funding it, why they're funding it. Something that I think is really helpful is looking at, the calculator can help with this, is like looking at that like cost per ton, of if you're talking about greenhouse gas emissions. Like that is a critical thing because cities, states, no one has infinite amount of funding. It's really great if we can get this dedicated source of funding, like the city of Denver has a climate protection fund that was used for this. Colorado has some dedicated like transportation funding we can use. Even that's not infinite. So we always are having to make the case and make trade-offs. Like what else could we be funding with this $1 million? Is it as effective a climate intervention or effective as an air quality intervention? So I think for me, like that's often the baseline. What is the cost per ton? And I see looking across programs that e-bikes can be a very, very effective cost per ton compared to other transportation interventions, especially that cities are considering. So I say that's a really important one to be thinking about and be mindful of. And I think can make a very compelling case for e-bike incentives.
Fabulous. Thank you so much. We have another great audience question. This is directed to Matthew, but I am sure all of you guys will have some thoughts about this type of question. Have any of these programs been evaluated with respect to effects on travel behavior of the participants? And do you have any plans to do so? And that also can mesh well with a question that we have in the chat from Luke. So from trips shifted for cars to bikes, what group shifted longer in miles, income qualified or general recipients? Matthew, since the question was directed to you, please feel free to take it away.
Yeah, great question. So yeah, we had in 2024, we had 30 e-bikes that went out the door, and then yeah, we're hoping for around 40 in 2025. So yeah, we have not like sat down and done like a thorough like a survey of all 30 recipients as of yet. I've received some anecdotal stuff from folks emailing me like I had one person who they received 2 for their household, and they talked about how like they were able to do their FedEx, drop off and the school drop off and go to the library all in a day. So that was very exciting to get that email from them immediately after kind of getting their rebates. But yes, that is something we're hoping to start to look at because yeah, we can input the models into the RMI calculator and get a great estimate of the long-term effects on travel behavior from the incentive program. But yes, getting that more like day to day, like what is the lived experience of the folks using this? And I think too, another question that I saw in the Q&A about like then using this to advocate for bicycling infrastructure, that is where we're hoping to kind of take this next with asking the recipients about their travel behaviors and then use that to be like, okay, folks want to use it, but we need more bike lanes, etc., in order to really leverage the money the city's putting into this. I think I got it all.
I think you did indeed. Ben, Tejas, Mike, do you guys have any further thoughts you'd like to contribute?
So we did do kind of a preliminary evaluation to show what the impact was on the first round of applicants. So that was about 281 people or so who redeemed their rebates for our first round. And it was showing this was a 3-month survey. So basically we issued it 3 months after they redeemed their rebates. And, I guess one of the big things it's showing to us, and again, this is kind of preliminary and it doesn't show, the entire program, and it's just 3 months after they redeemed their rebate. But one of the big things is, number one, people are using the e-bikes, right? They're riding them. One of the concerns is like, are people going to just redeem their rebates and just keep them in the garage or something like that? Or we heard that as a concern, but the survey data is showing us that's not the case. So 74% of rebate recipients are riding their e-bikes at least 2 days per week, which is encouraging. 77% of people who redeemed an e-bike rebate are riding their bikes more frequently since redeeming a rebate than beforehand. So there's increased frequency of riding. And then I think I mentioned this before, but 62% of those who are income qualified are riding their bikes more frequently than general e-bikes. So that's really encouraging. We're seeing some information on change of transportation behaviors. One of the big stats I'll just share with everyone is that we've seen a 40% reduction on average that rebate recipients are driving a car to work or school since redeeming their new e-bikes. That's a pretty significant reduction that we're seeing on that front. So, the early data is pretty encouraging. Obviously, we're going to continue to do surveys and kind of see how this program impact plays out over the next year. The one thing I'll just share on this front too, or one of the challenges that we encountered when we were doing the program evaluation for this is we're doing surveys, and we're relying on survey data. And part of that is because we didn't have dedicated funding for evaluation or for incentivizing people to use an app to track their rides, whether it's passive or active tracking. Which initially that was what we were hoping we would be able to do. So we'd have a lot more robust data that we could, really see where people were riding to, how that connected to infrastructure, to jobs, to transit. So I think one of our big recommendations, if this program is renewed, is that we have dedicated funding to help incentivize the use of an app so that rebate recipients will actually track their rides and we'll have even more robust data. But so far, it's definitely encouraging, and yeah, looking forward to seeing how it all plays out.
Fabulous. Thank you, Ben. So as a reminder, we're wrapping up the Q&A here. I'm going to ask one more question of our wonderful panelists, and they will probably answer a few more of your questions in the chat, and then we will move into the RMI specific chat before moving into the final part of this webinar, which will be a walkthrough of the calculator. So if you're interested in volunteering to have your city be one that you're working on, please feel free to message the Q&A function. So my final question to our wonderful panelists is, recognizing the utility of e-bikes is tied to bicycle infrastructure, can any of these panelists speak to if or how these e-bike rebate programs have been used to advocate for increased or enhanced bicycle infrastructure in your cities?
The short answer for us is yes. We're very much using the argument like, if the city is willing to give out money for e-bikes, we should be willing to give out money to support those e-bikes over the long term. And yeah, our transportation planner has been making that argument with our transportation commission and using his dedicated funds to make some of those expansions.
Yeah, I think we would love to do that. We actually got a question from one of the council members here specific to that. He was looking at one of our early reports on where applications are being received from, and he's like, well, how can we look at like where people apply for and relate that to where we should be making infrastructure investments? And it's kind of it's a really good question, but it also brings up a lot of other questions. But yeah, I think it's something that, at the very least, it's showing, at least within our program, that we had demand for this program in all parts of the city, and in lots of parts of the city where the city isn't making or hasn't made a lot of infrastructure investments. So it wasn't only the parts of the city where you're seeing, the good bike infrastructure. It's also lots of parts of the city where there's, frankly, very poor bike and pedestrian infrastructure. So at the very least, it shows, there's demand for e-bikes everywhere, and investments need to be thought of kind of broadly in that sense. But it's a really good question.
Yeah, and we're hoping that we as ARC can be kind of that like grass top level advocate for more bike and pedestrian infrastructure, whether it's bike lanes, cycle tracks, or off-road trails, to better connect the city and the region as a whole. And because we saw a lot of demand both in those areas where there's already some amount of infrastructure and places where there are not, it really goes to that idea of induced demand is real, but it can work for any mode. Like, we have decades of research that induced demand works for automobiles when we add more lanes of roadway or add new roads. The same can happen for other modes. If we add safe bike and scooter and e-bike infrastructure, it is easier for people to make that investment and say, yes, I will switch to biking, I will invest in an e-bike. And if we can build that infrastructure to either meet current demand or induce future demand, then it gives us even more reason to find ways to support these kinds of rebate programs, especially for those who are most economically needy within our regions.
I would just add to that. I think that e-bike incentive programs and additional infrastructure improvements, hopefully it is really part of a virtuous cycle, like the other panelists have talked about. I think that what we saw is we were, creating thousands of new cyclists in the city of Denver who then can go both to their city council people, to the mayor's office, to the Department of Transportation and Infrastructure to advocate now that they're trying out bikes. Like, wow, this is awesome. I wish I felt safer. I wish I had better routes. So in part, we're creating the additional constituency to help advocate for more infrastructure, which then again virtuously gets people to ride more miles on their e-bikes when you do put more protected, high comfort bike lanes in.
Fabulous. Thank you so much to our panelists. Thank you so much for your time. Please feel free to stay on. We have a lot of great questions in the chat. And unfortunately, I don't think we're going to get to answering them all. I will pass it over to Ellen for a few more comments before we move on. Due to the timing, I think it might be best for us to move into the walkthrough.
Agreed. And thank you all for your questions. Please feel free to keep them coming, both in chat and over email. We have every intention of following up with you directly. We want to make sure that your questions get answered. One note for you. This calculator is very much a living calculator. It has been created and it has been revised with input, with questions, with requests from city staff, from bicycle advocates. We are curious to understand how it can best serve your needs. So your input is very much welcome. And we hope that if you are in a geography that is not yet covered by this calculator, particularly for our international friends on the call, please be in touch with us. We're interested in helping you too. So with that, I'll turn it back to Bryn so that we can dive into the particulars of how the calculator works.
Fabulous. Thank you so much, Ellen. So we're also going to do a walkthrough of the calculator to show you some of the functionality that has been updated since the last time we released this calculator. So you should be able to download the calculator. My wonderful coworker sent the link earlier today. When you download the calculator, what you should see is an Excel sheet that looks like this. I presume that people can see my screen now. So like we said, we have all 50 states, this includes DC, and we have 500 plus cities. So if you are looking for your specific city, you can use this drop down. So if you're curious about the state level information, you can just select the state here and it should update this chart here. This will show you your miles grouping of your breakdown. So this dark blue is the percent of annual trips that you have under 3 miles, and then this lighter blue is the number of trips between 3 and 5 miles. So I am going to pick a large city that everybody's very familiar with. We're going to look at New York City, and you can see here they have roughly 50% of their trips are under 3 miles. So then you can go down to this section, your e-bike impact assessment scenario. You can either choose to leave it on the default, which is your citywide replacement goal, or you can leave it, or you can switch over to the e-bike incentive program. For now, I'm going to leave it on the e-bike incentive program. We look at the population and the population growth rate, as well as the percent of electric vehicles registered to residents in the city. This is something you can change if you have a more aggressive level of EVs, for example. We also have 3 different EV policy scenarios, so a business as usual, as well as a more aggressive scenario. Then you can come down here and you can determine whether you'd rather see what would happen with gradual adoption, so whether this goal is met over 10 years or immediate adoption. I'm going to leave it on the default value of gradual adoption. As my coworker mentioned earlier, we are going to leave it on our defaults for now, but we did make it so the calculator works on an annual level and it uses weather assumptions to look at what the average biking rate could be at those various points. So in New York, we presume it'll be a little bit nicer in the summer than in the winter. So we set the vehicle replacement goal as being higher at that period and then lower during the winter. Once you have everything determined how you would like it to be, you can go to your citywide goal outputs assessment tab here. So that will then show you the number of trips that we are assuming are being replaced, the number of bikes being added, and the number of miles that people are biking annually. This also then shows an updated greenhouse gas emissions tab where it looks at how much this would lower the emissions compared to doing business as usual, which again, we're presuming that these are trips that would be taken by a car if they weren't being done with an e-bike. And this chart here with the gray shows you what the emissions would look like otherwise, with the blue being what we assume could be the outcome of switching these trips. We assess the air quality impacts, so we look at the reduction in particulate matter, PM2.5, nitrous oxides, and carbon monoxide. And then we also look at VMT reduction. So this could cut local traffic by roughly 15% and reduce all VMT from the area by 2%. We also look at the economic impact over 10 years. So this does include that we assume that people will buy a new battery in the 4th and 8th year of ownership. This just lines up with current best practices. And we only here are looking at the impacts of solely reducing fuel and maintenance costs. There's more costs that could potentially be saved. For example, people might not need a second car, and so then they could save even further on registration costs, insurance costs, and the like. This was a question that we had earlier. We do look at avoided fuel and electricity costs. So you can see over time that this would lead to a reduction in kilowatt hours being needed, and this would also reduce the amount of gasoline that's needed. For example, in New York, we calculate that this could avoid 45 million gallons of gasoline over 10 years, and the same amount of electricity as to power nearly 8,000 American homes for 1 year. As my coworker mentioned earlier, we also looked at the COBRA, the Co-Benefits Risk Assessment Health Impacts Screening and Mapping tool, to assess what the impacts of reducing particulate matter could be. So New York would see a reduction of potentially minimum 12-ish tons of PM2.5, which could result in losing the reduction of losing nearly over 500 days or 150 days of work. So this means that by getting rid of particulate matter, you would improve the health of people within your city. We also then have this detailed table down here that looks at how much tons of CO2 this would reduce per e-bike, as well as the total overall. So now that we've looked at that, we can go here and we can change from the goal, the citywide goal, to the e-bike incentive program. That will gray out this box that we were looking at before, and it will open up this section down here. So the calculator also sets a potential budget based off the size of the city. And then we also have these different e-bike incentive levels for market rate, low income, and moderate income. These are based off of Denver and its current levels. We also look at the percentage of incentives that would go to low income, to market rate, and to these moderate income, as well as the miles that they biked. This was based off of some survey work that the city of Denver did. So you can choose to change any of these, or you can leave it as is. And then once you have everything set, you can go to this incentive program outputs tab. This will then summarize all of your different variables. So you could, for example, screenshot this and then compare it to a different assessment if you're trying to figure these things out. Please note that the program budget is solely the budget for the incentives. I'm not including administrative costs in this. So when you're using this to look at the potential impacts of your program, please put the amount that you actually will be able to dedicate towards the incentives there. So then this is much the same as the other one. You can look at the impacts on your emissions over time, the tons reduced, as well as the VMT. Instead of the overall savings, we have the individual average savings per year. And again, this is presuming a new battery in the 4th and 8th year of ownership, as you can see here. We also, again, still look at the avoided annual fuel costs and the avoided mortality and prevented lost work days due to the adoption of this program. Down here, we also use the budget to calculate the number of incentives that would be offered per year and the budget allotted to each of them. We also then have this detailed table down here, which will include things such as the total VMT reduction and your individual VMT reduction, metric tons reduced, and then the total reduced per bike. So, and then bringing up what Mike said earlier, we also have the pounds of CO2 reduced per dollar spent on this program. So this is something you can easily change. Let's say that you really want to have 100% of your e-bike incentives go towards moderate and low income. You can go here, you can set this to 0. And let's say you set this to 50 and this to 50. This will automatically change out everything to then account for that difference. So as you can see here, this would change out the savings. And down here, it changes out the budget. The market rate number of incentives has dropped to 0, while you can see the budget here has gone up for both. You can also then use this to assess your program after you've done it. So let's say that you see that the moderate income qualified participants are as aggressive as biking as the low income participants. You can change that out as well. And that will then impact, for example, the percent reduction in VMT, as well as the total savings. We also have this tab here, which includes some of the things that we are currently still working on figuring out how to quantify. So studies that indicate that e-bikes can be useful for reducing traffic congestion and improving commute times. They can provide exercise, they can provide noise reduction. Those things that we are still learning how to potentially quantify in this calculator. We also included some studies on best practices for infrastructure development and increased use, as well as some case studies and best practices for designing your e-bike incentive program. That's an overview of the calculator overall. So Ellen and Kirill, if you have a second, potentially we could address a few last questions before we close out. So taking a look at the Q&A. I think it'd be useful to know what other health updates we want to make to the calculator over time. So we have a great comment that says that we could potentially try to look at the impacts of physical activity increases and reducing the harm from air pollution.
Yeah, I agree. That would be quite interesting to do. So long as it's possible to tie outcomes to the quantities that we calculate, it's something we can definitely look into.
I would agree. I think if there are any particular data sources that you find valuable that you'd like us to look at adding to the calculator, please feel free to make those suggestions.
Yes, please reach out if you have any data sources, or if you're a city who has any thoughts about how we could improve this calculator in the future. Another question that we have in the chat is, does the calculator provide any information on incentives for multifamily housing developments or HOAs to provide charging and secure storage for e-bikes? Well, based on the walkthrough, not quite yet, but I'm sure Ellen would like to provide some thoughts on how else e-bikes could potentially benefit people living in multifamily housing developments. Ellen?
Well, certainly in a number of ways. We have engaged with residents at multifamily communities that have said that they are really interested in e-bike use, whether it's personally owned, whether it's coming through an e-bike share program. And, as I mentioned earlier, we have also engaged with cities that have been discussing revamping their parking minimums and just rethinking how space is allocated, particularly in the densest part of the city. And so as they're thinking about doing that, this is a great way to engage and say, well, there's a wonderful solution that will keep people mobile, that will keep people connected, but will also reduce the need for that parking space. So these are things that can be discussed with the owners, the managers of multifamily communities, but also in making the case for how to make mobility more affordable. That's a really important thing to be thinking about in lower income parts of your cities, where you know that the transportation cost burdens are high, where sometimes there's a pretty sizable disconnect with publicly available transportation. And so thinking about how to better connect the residents there with a mode that is more affordable to them, that helps them to get to where they need to go, like these e-bikes, it is incredible what can happen in terms of connecting them with employment opportunities and, you know, critical services that otherwise they have trouble reaching. So these are all, I think, discussion points that can be made as you're looking at how to engage with multifamily communities and the residents, managers, owners there.
I would also like to note earlier we got a question asking for a list of all active state or city e-bike incentive programs. And we linked to a document by the wonderful John MacArthur, who is actually here in the webinar. And he messaged us to let us know that they are in the middle of updating the e-bike incentive program tracker and adding new information about programs. The updated version will hopefully be out in April. So he says that if you have any information, please feel free to email him. So John, thank you for the hard work with keeping that an active thing that is very useful for cities to see. I believe we're at the end of our time here. So thank you everybody for coming. And we would love to pass it back over to Ellen for the closing remarks for this webinar.
Thank you all again for your time, for your participation, for your energy on chat and engagement with your questions. We look forward to following up with you and hearing about how this calculator has been of use to you already, how you plan to use it in the future, and also if there's additional functionality that you hope that we'll be exploring so that we can add to it, we can help it grow and be a reflection of your needs. We love making free data tools available, so please continue to be in touch with us, and thank you again for joining us today.